Hello, hello, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about brain health, which is something that we talk about all the time, high level, but we've never really done a deep dive into brain health and cognition. So
Right.
here we
And
are.
it's something that every man and every woman need to pay attention to. It's and it can really strike at just about any age. And we'll hopefully go through a lot of detail that shows that yes, we kind of typically talk about dementia, onsets of dementia in elderly populations. But this is something that we hopefully can show you and explain to you that is a condition that starts early. And when I mean early, I think in the 30s, and there can be arguments earlier and later, but this is something that of decades long activity that occurs that leads to setting up the conditions of onsets of dementia.
Yes. So essentially, dementia has been thought of as a disease that just either, you know, happens to you or doesn't, or is a genetic predisposition. But the truth is, it really is a lifestyle disease.
Right. Yeah, it is truly a lifestyle slash metabolic disease. I mean, there are, yes, genetic predispositions, like you say, to these certain types of conditions for types of dementia, but in essence, yeah, this is something that is modifiable. That's the key. That's the important thing. And today I hope we'll kind of talk about the metabolic influence, the hormonal influences, and of course, our pillars of lifestyle changes that we hopefully can address and kind of let people just kind of start to ponder. So
Yeah. And then we'll also talk about the difference between men and women and Alzheimer's and
right,
dementia.
right, yeah, because it's quite interesting how it breaks down, and then there's a lot of studies and research still being done on the subject, but and when you look at the causes for the treatments for Alzheimer's specifically, there's not a lot of good options out there. So this is one of those things that, when you get it, it's not really something you're going to fix or correct. So that usually progresses. And so that all the more importance of avoidance. So, but with dementia, let's just start out in basic form here. It's just dementia is a very general umbrella term, and it's essentially used as is the term for a decline in your mental ability, which is just severe enough to interfere with your daily life. You can just totally think about it that way. And there's a lot of different varieties of causes that lead to dementia and different specific types of dementia. But Alzheimer's is one that we kind of want to focus a little bit more on today. But kind of keeping in mind that of all the different types that are out there, they all will fall under the same modifiable life changes that a person can do to help improve or reduce their risk for developing these forms of dementia. But specifically, almost Alzheimer's is one that we'll do more attention to because it's the most common cause of dementia. And it's going to be literally accounting for 60 to 80% of the cases of dementia out there. And when we start looking at it, yes, with Alzheimer's being the primary cause of dementia, the other ones are, there's vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and Lewy body dementia. So those are just some of the bigger ones that are out there.
And Alzheimer's is the dementia that you're hearing, that type 3 diabetes um,
Hmm.
in the media and hearing that around. So, which we've talked about that too, insulin resistance and diabetes leading to Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that brain, it runs on glucose, and insulin is such a very potent signaler to the system and very inflammatory. And so, unfortunately, there are a lot of individuals that don't get fasting insulin levels drawn to see where they're at. And, that insulin level creeps up on people, decades before other symptoms and signs of other lab works even start to develop. And so it's always kind of a good idea to kind of keep that in mind too, that these are things that can be identified in their early stages for
Yes.
avoidance.
And ultimately, we see a lot of patients that have a normal glucose and a normal hemoglobin A1C and an elevated, well, still a normal insulin, but
Right.
not optimal
Right.
insulin. And then once you plug in those numbers to calculate the Homa-IR, they're definitely already struggling with insulin
Yeah.
resistance.
And these things are completely modifiable. There is no way that these things cannot be modifiable. It's just something that needs to be known. And then you can take that information and start to change what you need to change. So,
Yeah.
and
And once we know
yeah,
that it takes decades for these things to progress, we we can then recognize that our 40s and 50s is the prime time to really be preventive for these things.
right. It's just, there's a lot of numbers and a lot of studies out there, but I will just suffice it to say the majority of dementia cases are modified. These are avoidable. And there's a lot of different types that we spoke about, but of those folks that have the dementia, it's certainly something that if caught early can be corrected. So, and we're talking about something that decades before symptoms even appear with dementia, that this is something that's been ongoing. And that's something we can hopefully kind of let you know about that. With Alzheimer's dementia, we're looking at amyloid buildup, tau tangles, and it's basically a neurodegenerative finding. It's essentially atrophy of the brain. You can kind of look at it that way. And the ways that we can identify those early symptoms, on blood work, it can be done through lab work, through the blood, through CSF, central cerebral spinal fluid. And then you can also see these findings on MRIs too. And then there's the genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's dementia, which 20% of the people, up to 20% of the people, carry this genetic predisposition in the form of a gene called the ApoE4. I think we looked up the cost of that.
Yeah. So the self-pay price through the lab company that we work with is $159 for that test. So
Hmm.
it's not, a cheap little test, but
Well,
it is there. And I would say, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the ApoE4 to Alzheimer's would be similar to what we're looking at when we look at like the LP little a and
correct.
cardiovascular disease.
Absolutely. It's a good analogy. Yeah, it's something that you can determine if you have a genetic predisposition to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to develop it. Of the cases of Alzheimer's disease that are out there, 65% of these people, numbers in that range, 65% of these people will have a positive ApoE4 gene. And so that makes okay, well, what about the other 35%? So that's some significant lifestyle changes that can help with that. And even though you've got a positive gene for this, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. Yes, we4 is the gun, but the lifestyle changes pull the trigger. How many times have we heard that analogy? So
This is one of those things that I kind of just always like to mention. Every person is different in the way that they handle this kind of information, and some people do not wanna know. They don't want to have any idea
right.
if, what might be coming, and there are other people who can take this information and use it in a good positive way. So, it is really important to know what your personality type is before you go into looking at a test like this and decide, is it something that you'll be able to take and that may give you a little bit of extra push to make some preventative changes?
Mhm. And then, of course, if there's a lot of curiosity, there's tests that you can do online to determine your dementia risk or dementia possibility, to see if you truly have dementia or if it's just, yourself. And so there's a lot of things that can be done online.
Different kinds of cognitive tests you're
Correct.
talking about?
Exactly.
Yes. The BOCA test is one that you can do online. I know that providers can give a MoCA test, and there are lots of things that your healthcare provider can do to test cognition
Hmm.
while you're
Right. And
at the office.
of course, yeah, you can do the legwork yourself by just going online. So, but as far as it's quite interesting. I wanted to bring up a little quick story before we talk about gender differences, but But just recently in the office yesterday, I'd seen a couple that were in their 90s, and they had come in to see me for various different reasons. But they were in their 90s and they had been married for 72 years, and they were both very sharp and very witty and had great memories. And I was really impressed with that. And that just really kind of let me know that, yeah, there's hope for a lot of people out there if they'll just do the right things from a lifestyle standpoint, that they can get up into those older ages and still enjoy life and be functional. And that's a really positive thing I think we need to kind of focus on a little bit. But which is kind of leads me to the next topic is the gender difference. Well, why is that? Why do women, like nearly 2/3 of all Alzheimer's cases are women? Why would that be?
Well, it's not just because they live longer.
And it's not just because they live longer. There is some thought and theory about that too. But it's really got to do with what we think, and we will soon find out more about, is hormone treatment. Estrogen is a very neuroprotective hormone. It supports your blood flow to your brain. It's going to reduce that neuroinflammation, and it promotes the neuroplasticity, the development of neurological pathways, if you will. But it helps to clear the amyloid plaques in the brain. It's been shown to do that.
And I know Lisa Mosconi is one of the big researchers on this topic. She's got several books. She's still doing research, some that's just getting ready to come out.
Right.
So,
Yeah, they're up and running on a care study right now, which shows that not they don't have the data printed. So the research studies, the information's not out there yet, but it's pretty suggestive that what they're doing is looking at the influence of menopause hormone replacement therapy on prevention of Alzheimer's disease. So I think that's very encouraging to see that. And I certainly think because of the neuroprotective effect of estrogen on the brain, I'm certainly going to see some improved, or some numbers there that are going to agree with that. It's just a matter of what effect will it have. So I'm encouraged to see that when that comes out.
and this is one of those things that brain fog is very often a symptom of perimenopause, something that we hear, and it just kind of validates that there are reasons behind that brain fog.
Right.
You're not just losing your mind, you're losing estrogen.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so important. And men also need estrogen just like women do. So it's not just a female disease, guys. So that's certainly something to consider also. Other specific factors could be just simply thyroid dysfunction too, an inappropriate supportive thyroid. And I'm not talking about maybe normal levels in bloodstream. I'm talking about what's going on at the cellular level, at the receptor level for each cell that has the thyroid receptors. The density of these receptors. So if we don't support ourselves from a thyroid standpoint, thyroid hormone standpoint, then that also is a contributor to brain fog.
And chronic stress, as well as the sleep disruption that women have during perimenopause is huge. We're going to talk a little bit about sleep again later, but
Right. And men also gets Alzheimer's too. It's less frequent, but we're not off the hook because from a guy standpoint, there's obviously vascular dementia and Lewy body dementias. Lewy body is more of a genetic predisposition, but still, it's a little more highly driven to be in the male population. But testosterone is also very neuroprotective. That's also something that reduces that amyloid accumulation and deposits also, but it supports our mood and motivation. And once again, testosterone is not a male hormone. Females also have that in abundance, and that's also something that needs to be considered.
so the male risk pattern looks a little bit different as far as some of the things that are happening in males, just like they do in females, but I would say maybe go a little bit undertreated,
Mhm.
maybe. Hypertension, metabolic syndrome, sleep apnea are all pathways to cognitive decline.
Yeah, yeah. So if those aren't treated properly, then left alone, those will accelerate the cognitive decline. that we see in men specifically.
And I think the other thing that people have been trained to do is think of these symptoms as just signs of aging.
Right.
And so
I'm getting older. How many times we hear that?
they don't address them,
Right.
right? Like because it's just part of life. Well, maybe it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. It's not something you just write off. And and we see men hiding it. For various different reasons. Maybe that they just don't want anybody to know that they're just not as sharp as what they used to be. So they kind of skate around it and change subjects and move on. So it's certainly something that from a secret standpoint, it's something that the men do typically hide pretty well.
I would say probably women,
And I think, yeah,
depending. I mean,
I think a lot of people would be more motivated to try, not motivated, but more in it, more to want to try to hide that,
sure.
not knowing really what's going on and kind of being ashamed or scared to kind of admit that.
Yeah. I think fear is a
Hmm.
big player in a lot of these
Yeah, yeah.
things.
But so what are the big lifestyle levers? What are the things that you can do to move the needle to make the biggest difference in your cognitive health to prevent the decline? First and foremost, right off the bat, nutrition. That is one thing that is really huge. And it's not that one of these has more weight necessarily than the other. There are benefits of each one of these, but nutrition is just a place to start for us. Is that, that this brain insulin connection is pretty important. And what drives up insulin resistance, what drives insulin levels higher, what creates more neuroinflammation, is, these ultra processed refined carbs, processed sugars and starches. They drive this neuroinflammation, and the brain doesn't like that.
So, some of the key nutrients that you're looking for to optimize your brain health would be omega 3s, which is, you know,
Right, get that and the
good
good fats.
good fats, polyphenols, and B vitamins, as well as magnesium, making sure that all of these things are optimal in your system. So fuel your body to get those.
The benefits, right? And we talk about, there's ins time restricted feeding is also an option for folks to help them with their insulin resistance. It's kind of intermittent fasting. It's kind of the big buzzwords for that. And there's a time and a place for it, but it also has to be really organized so that you can maintain your nutritional protein intake levels, but yet help to try to improve your insulin sensitivity and keep those glucose spikes down. And so that's something that we do address.
And always like to talk about those things to add into your diet instead of focusing on the things to take away. But it is appropriate to say that alcohol is one of those things that your body treats just like sugar.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we know that it is not good for you.
Right. It is neurotoxic. There's no question about that. Mitochondria don't like alcohol, and that's for sure. And next on our levers
Movement.
is movement. And it's you can argue about all the different pillars that we're going to cross over to one's real important, one's not important. This is better than that. But I see movement as the single most important evidence-based backed intervention for brain health, period. Full stop. There's just no question that activity and movement and exercise help this. Whether it be myokine release into your system, there's a lot of different receptors. There's a lot of different neurotransmitters. There's a lot of benefits from exercise. Not only is it good for your system physiologically, it makes you feel good also.
Yeah. So aerobic exercise is great for BDNF, which is like a fertilizer for neuron growth.
Brain derived neurotropic factor.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And strength training, obviously, we talk a lot about strength training. Muscle is medicine, is something that comes up quite a bit. That will help with insulin sensitivity, reduces neuroinflammation, and is just independently associated with reduced dementia risk.
Yeah. And even getting out and just moving, a minimum step if a person has to say, well, how many steps do I have to have in a day to have exercise or activity? Try to get 7 or 8,000 steps a day would be ideal.
That's the actual studies have been done to say that 7,000 is the actual minimum number
Right.
for movement.
And we're a pretty sedentary society. And so that's takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of planning to be able
Mhm.
to do that.
And I will say too that we're gonna talk about stress in a minute, but I think that movement really has a huge effect on stress
Yes.
too. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a win-win movement is.
It improves a lot of things. It improves your insulin sensitivity, it improves your sleep protocol, and reduces your stress. So, I mean, it's just hands down the best medication you can give your body is movement.
So next pillar is going to be sleep. We've talked a lot about sleep, and so now we're going to focus on why it's so important for brain health.
Yeah. So, you know, basically during sleep, that's kind of when the garbage disposal goes on. That's how our brain clears all the stuff, all the waste products and gets rid of everything. And that's our clearance system, and that's the lymphatic system. Basically, there's a lot of stuff that gets in our brain, kind of a soup that gets cleared when we're sleeping. And that's how our body recharges. That's how we recharge our batteries is at night. If we don't get good sleep, if we're having sleep apnea or something like that, really, you're not getting good sleep. You're not clearing those products. And so it's going to be, you're going to be tired and fatigued the next day and have kind of the brain fog problem. But that's when the amyloid and tau proteins are flushed out, which we see build up during Alzheimer's. So, but poor sleep is just one of those very significantly modifiable risk factors too that just really need to be addressed. And 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, good quality sleep are important. So,
So then stress is next on our list. Chronic stress, chronic cortisol is not good for our brain.
yeah, yeah, it's quite neurotoxic. And, and in Alzheimer's brain, we'll see the hippocampus is an area of the brain that does shrink quite a bit. That's something that could be measured actually on an MRI. And that literally shrinks, that cortisol will shrink that hippocampus. And so we're not talking about the acute stress, a day-to-day acute stress is good. It's a good system. But the chronic stress from day to day to day, all day long, and even it happens into the night for folks. Not only can it disrupt your sleep, but it can kind of predispose you for more risk factors for developing dementia. But the hypothalamic pituitary axis is something that dysregulation really can drive neuroinflammation for folks. So that's where that controlling that stress and having strategies and protocols in place to help control that stress, whether it's breathing activities or meditation or time outside, nature, walks, whatever, something to kind of reset that switch is a good thing to do.
And that will kind of take us into social connection because social connection can help with your stress, but it is also its own pillar all by itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to believe that. I mean, I've had conversations with a lot of folks, even in our religious community, that talk about, the connection is a true improvement in health and lifestyle improvement. But that is a major independent risk factor for dementia too.
Mhm.
And you hear about the blue zones, the individuals that have a higher population of individuals in their hundreds. They have that system, they have that connection, they have that daily purpose well thought out and interact with it. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and there's even some evidence out there that shows that social isolation could be compared to smoking or sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, it just takes years off your life.
And your cognitive engagement and lifelong learning, that's one of the things why people are who continue to learn that keeps their brain
Hmm. Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah, and we talk about this a lot. I mean, we just had a discussion about this today, you and I, about how those types of challenges from a cognitive standpoint can improve neuroplasticity. Whether whether it be learning a new hobby or picking up an instrument or becoming, socially interactive with a group.
Learning a new language,
Right,
learning a new skill even.
right, right, exactly. So those types of things make a huge difference on just continue to, use the brain. You heard the old story, if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. Challenge yourself. Continue to try to challenge yourself. So,
So, where do we start? And I think the first part is going to be just knowing where you're at. This is kind of what we call in our practice the reveal phase. Know your numbers. What is your fasting insulin? What is your Homa-IR? Hemoglobin A1C, homocysteine, C reactive protein, vitamin D. Look at a thyroid in a deep dive and look at your hormones.
right.
Know where you're at so that you can know how to get to the next step.
And hormones being, of course, thyroid, estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone, free in total. Free testosterone is a very important marker. So it's not just the total number that we see there.
And then the second part that we typically talk about is rebalance. So once we know what we've got going on, how do we rebalance these things to set ourselves up for better prevention?
Right.
And so for brain health, eliminate ultra processed foods, try it for 30 days. I think this is something that so many people look over, like skip over. I don't know how many patients that I've heard who have tried an elimination diet and haven't felt different after going 30 days
Hmm.
without having these things.
Yeah.
And it's not only it's things like pain and GI and,
Not
so
even
many.
talking about the brain fog and
Right,
neuroinflammation.
yeah. I mean, it's
Right.
all of those things.
Gut health, bloating, etc. You name it. So it's like, oh wow, I can't believe people been off it and they reintroduce something. It's like, man, I can't believe I live like that. So it's certainly an eye-opening experience for them. Yeah. And then adding some strength training, some cardio and strength training. We try to get people to do something 5 days out of the week. Give you 2 days rest, but try to do something 5 days out of the week. We always try to encourage folks to do the cardiovascular activities 2 or 3 days a week, and the other 2 or 3 days of the week do some strength training. But really try to build up your muscle bank. That is certainly building muscle is medicine, and it's certainly something that helps to improve your physiology.
And I would just say, recognize that some people are starting from ground zero. And so starting with baby steps is
Hmm.
absolutely appropriate. This is a time when you can do this. The urgency is a little bit less because you're starting early in your 40s and 50s. So do what you can, add in little bits and then build from there.
And we're not talking about having a session that's an hour long or an
Right.
hour and a half. That is, I don't want to say it's unrealistic, but it's certainly something that is not sustainable and consistent. A lot of people can give me 15 or 20 minutes of activity in a day. I don't care who you are, you will. You can do that. And it's just a matter of motivation and finding the time. You have to prioritize this. And your health is got to be a priority. And the next thing is protecting your sleep.
Hmm.
We just have to be ruthless about protecting our sleep and having that time to clear the brain, to reset the batteries. It's really important to do that.
And I think that that is something that is really hard, challenging. It can be challenging when you've lived your life a certain way for a really long time. And when you start protecting your sleep, you realize that, you can't go to dinner at 8 p.m. anymore.
Oh,
You have to go early. You know, we really enjoy going to the theater, and I'm looking for matinees now
yeah,
because when you go to a show, you don't get home till really late.
right. You eat out and then you go somewhere late and you're tired and fatigued at the theater. And then when you get home, you're just beat and it's so late.
Yes, so we're all for, like, if you are the people who are doing the matinees and going to
Yeah,
dinner at 5 p.m. Like, let's do it.
kudos. Yeah, exactly. It's funny too because I talked to a friend this week that's it's a single parent, and they've got one child between them, and they split custody, and she always has to have she wants dinner by 5 or 5:30 for this boy to be able to get it in, get it down, do the activities, get ready for bed. And the other parent is not that way. They think the opposite. They typically won't eat until 7:30 or even 8 sometimes. Well, that's bedtime for the little kiddo. So it's certainly something that it makes a difference.
So the last step is revive. And what are some things that we can do to really keep moving in the direction and prevention? So supplements, omega-3s, we talked about that as being one of the nutrients that's really important. B complex and, making sure that you've got the magnesium that you need. There's a lot of talk about magnesium right now, and there are a lot of different types of magnesium.
Yeah.
Magnesium threonate is one that is really good for brain health.
Yeah. And of course, B12 is an important part of our B complex with folate, methylfolate. That's important. So those cells need that. But
And then vitamin D is typically
right,
one of
yeah,
our foundational things
right.
because it is very, very common for people to be on the low end of normal or deficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's literally if a person doesn't take vitamin D, they're deficient. We just don't get it. We're not outside hunting and gathering in our loincloths. And so we don't get that vitamin D production. So
And then take on a cognitive challenge, learn a new skill, learn how to play an instrument or a new language. Just learn something new that will,
yeah.
a lot of
Challenge
people,
yourself.
yeah. And a lot of people like puzzles. There's definitely brain games out there that are good for cognitive health.
Painting is another good cognitive
Yeah.
activity.
Art in general.
Just coloring. Get
Mhm.
an adult coloring book. Color different pictures and things. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do, but it just really helps to maintain that cognitive level.
And then invest in your social infrastructure.
Yeah.
Make connection and know that making that connection is really powerful for your overall health.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just so important just to just kind of continue to really understand that your brain is not separate from your body, and that what you do for your body will also help your brain. And it's really important to maintain good metabolic health, and support your hormones, your sleep, and reduce your stress. And it's truly an investment. We spend so much time trying to save money and build up a nest egg for retirement, and we don't take the time to invest in our own health, our own cognitive health. So I would encourage you to look into that.
Well, I hope we shed a little light on the subject today and you got a few pearls anyway from today's conversation, and certainly reach out if you have further questions.
Yeah, and we hope you have a healthy day.